Okay, so why is integration so hard? That's going to talk about, maybe you already know the answer, that's why there's 3 dots in between, because that's my story. It's going to be through my perspective. So I know it's broad, but I'll look it through my lens for what I've done the last 20 years or so. And I built up this story in my head. I was like, I want to talk about this. So I made a whole slide deck. And I thought, I'll also ask ChatGPT. See if my story aligns what AI thinks. And it talks about different systems. Yeah, that's right, because we are connecting different systems, applications, different technologies. Yeah, for sure. I'll talk about that. Different data formats, of course. Inconsistencies, that's what we deal with. That's why we got the job, right? Difficulties, yeah, that's for sure as well. And maintaining it over time, that's what we also do. That's why I got the gray beard and hair, or lost all the hair actually. So different formats, right? So who in the audience has worked with EDI? See, there are hands, right? So, and I was told, although I went in IT around 2000, so I think there was already EDI. I still worked as a lab technician, so I have a biochemistry, biotechnology background. I worked on pregnancy tests, but we're not going to talk about that. But during that day, you had EDI, and then XML came. And they thought like, hey, well, EDI is going to move away. But it's not. And even CSV, we all work with that, right? With BizTalk server, and then you had the flat file text editor, or you had these positional files that you had to create. I'm still doing that today. I'm like, wow. And of course, then JSON came along. So we got all these formats still. So this is a manufacturing integration. This is what I built pretty recent. I talked about it also probably last year when I was talking about integration capabilities from Dynamics towards manufacturing systems. So business event, something happens within Dynamics. You can tie that, or at least have that emitted to an endpoint, which you can configure. And the endpoint can be an event-driven topic. So it ends up as a JSON message. And that JSON message is something that we use to enrich it. Then we put it on a queue, or a topic. And then another logic app subscribe it. So the logic apps are more like orchestrators in this case. And then I have to create an XML. So from JSON, I'm going to XML. And then an XML ends up on a file server somewhere on-prem. And then goes to the machine that does its manufacturing or production, and then it will come back with a report as finished. So on one end, you got your JSON format. On the other end, you got XML. So you're already dealing with multiple formats. And even back in the BizTalk day, file adapter we used a lot. You got text files. Text files became XML because the internal engine only understood XML. Then protocols, another thing, right? So file, SFTP, HTTPS, we're all using this quite frequently. And I thought, even when I was doing some modern integrations, in this manufacturing case, that I would be only talking to APIs and HTTPS, but no, file. I talked to some people too, and like, yeah, in retail, you lose a lot of files still. So, and even EDI, although there are vans in between that provide you XML, but yeah, you know, you have all this. So in a retail integration, recently built, so this is all modern, right? So pipes and filters, and I'm using event hubs or event grid, and I'm using functions, and I'm like, you know, I do this validation, and then I do this mapping to CDM, you know, completely loosely coupled. But still, the message originates from file. I'm using store sync, so that's a networking capability allowing you to synchronize an on-premise file server with Azure file. That's a part of Azure storage. You could mount it if you want, but still you're connected on-prem. Or some of the organizations work with SFTP, so we're still using file transfer protocols. Although it's secure, but we're still doing this. And then coming back to that manufacturing, so that report is finished, for instance, comes back as a text message or an XML. That's converted back to JSON, then gets posted on a service bus, and then we do the interaction with Dynamics over HTTPS. So in this case, I got file on one end, and I got HTTPS on the other one, including security and all that stuff. So different formats, different protocols. That's one thing. The other thing is change. That's what we're dealing with as well. And this is a really nice slide I once created when I was working at Coded, or at least some of my colleagues did it. This is something we did yesterday, as in the old days, SAP, mainframe. I even talked to Stefan Milan yesterday about, if he still works with host integration server, and the mainframe said, yes, I'm still doing it at banks. So that still exists. And even SAP, although you got SAP in the cloud as well with SAP HANA, and some of those systems are still there, and there's other systems that are in the cloud. Like, for instance, Salesforce. That was one of the early SaaS systems that were in the cloud. And I even did a hybrid integration back then with Salesforce and BizTalk. And then, of course, there was kind of the promise years ago too, is like, oh yeah, and then everything is as a SaaS product available in the cloud, and then we're only doing things in the cloud. And SaaS, just to give you an example, is a lot. It's proliferated a lot. So we know on-prem systems with SAP and Oracle and Siebel, all that stuff, and AX. Now it's all of these systems that support business processes and where you need to connect in. And basically you got the shift from BizTalk server, that still exists. Even heard rumors today or yesterday, oh, there's going to be another version. Some betting not, some are betting there are. Then you have BizTalk that evolved and also gave that connectivity with the cloud through connectors and Logic App and API management. And there's others way. We got hybrid situations and scenarios, right? And then you got this complete, only using Azure Integration Service and then tying those SaaS systems together. As an example, this is what I've done too. Something happened in Salesforce. So an entity changed. So this is an asset management integration. That event's pushed to a Logic App. That Logic App will then transform it to a cloud event, because that's more like the industry standard using for eventing. Publish that on a topic, and then the topic has a handler behind it, which will then subsequently do a callback. It has API management in between for the communication and get some security up. So you see an example of a policies that are being complied, because you need, for every operation, you need a token. So first you do your authentication, and then for each operation you have that token stuck in. You get a result back, and that result you can even within a policy only filter out what you need, and then push that, for instance, to ServiceNow. So already discussed on-prem, hybrid, and completely cloud. And actually, for me, the situation is like this. We have it still all. We have a broker. This can be BizTalk server, but I have no customers that have another proprietary broker. You can have the cloud talk to the edge, right? And you can even have cloud. So this is the situation. It is not, we have this yesterday, we have this today, and this is tomorrow. No, it's not. It's this. And in considering that, looking at what you potentially build in the cloud, then you also have other challenges. It's either you go complete consumption, serverless, platform as a service. You can think about containerization, container apps. Becomes interesting when your client says we want it air-gapped. Something I learned recently, a word, air-gapped, means that there's VNet integration and all kinds of networking. Makes it very, very hard when it comes to a deployment of it. Or it can be a mixture of public, firewall, that kind of stuff. With Cosmos DB or Azure, you have these firewall rules and stuff going on. Or you could isolate one part of it, have a private endpoint, publish on the event grid topic, but then the rest is open. And this is interesting too. I think there's a technology smorgasbord. So I said smorgasbord at home, and my wife's like, what's a smorgasbord? Well, it's something that the Swedes do, right? They have this nice palette of nice food, right? So you're looking at it, oh, I got all this cool tech. So I got like Logic Apps and, well, the Azure Integration Service, you got your messaging component. There's even things like containerization that you can do, container apps, Dapr, distributed application programming runtime. So even the open source gets infused into the tech as well that you can use for integration. So what I've learned recently is that Dapr version 1.10 also supports workflow. So wait a minute, now I've got workflow in the Microsoft Cloud with Power Platform. Then I got durable functions, which has workflow capability. Then I have a Logic App that can kind of have that similar thing that you can call an orchestration in BizTalk. And I got Dapr. So again, I've got choices now, all these choices for solving stuff. And then I got ility. So when it comes to architecture, you talk about availability, scalability, usability, a lot of ilities. I'm not going through all of them, but what I found interesting is that I see at other conferences this observability. So this is the actual definition of it. And even back in the day when I was a lab technician, I did all kinds of tests about all metrics we're using to see if there was contamination in the medium we used to create immunoglobulins for medicine, or if the proteins we were making were pure enough. So we're using high pressure chromatography or something like that. But they were all metrics, and then we started observing, is this correct? And we're doing something similar with building integrations. We want to observe how does that integration behave. And we want to learn potentially where those things go wrong. We want to learn about the integration. That's why the observability comes in. And even when you have to support it in the end, when you define some of your server level objectives to get to the SLA, that's important too. And one of the things, this is also where you see the open source world start infusing in that area as well. So one of the things that is up and coming is called OpenTelemetry, and even Microsoft is pushing it. And it's an open source, open for, oh, someone's alarm, someone has to wake up. Is it you? No, it is an open source framework that allows you to analyze the telemetry data. Even I did analyzation of metrics, but you have the metrics, logs, and traces that come from your infrastructure and your software. And there's like vendor neutral or agnostic SDKs available, allowing you to set this up. And an example of is the recently released Azure Monitor OpenTelemetry distribution. So that sits on top of the OpenTelemetry SDK. And underneath it, you use the iLogger, which you probably know from Azure Functions. You have meter, you have activities. And you can, through an exporter, get that to Azure Monitor. But it can also be Jaeger Prometheus. You can even have managed Grafana in Azure. So you're completely agnostic. So it collects all the telemetry, and you could probably see this as a potential future open standard or industry standard, where you can choose your own tooling in the end to do the analyzation. There's even like Honeycomb.io. I talked to people at QCon in London, so a few months back. Yeah, they even completely only focus on OpenTelemetry and then do their thing. And then Microsoft doesn't have to worry about it. They just support OpenTelemetry, you export it, and then you can use any kind of tool you want. For instance, if you want to enable this, I did a quick research. I put it in an Azure a durable function. This is just an example of it. It's just 3 lines of code, effectively. A potential way, if you go to that distro page, you see there's other ways to do the instrumentation. But it's pretty straightforward. And then it sends out a telemetry, which you subsequently can observe, let's say in Application Insights. This is just an example of what you will see. The other thing that's up and coming, of course, is sustainability. So you think about green computing. We have to worry about, or we might have to worry about that climates are changing and stuff, but even this also accounts for what we do in the cloud. With the elasticity, utilization, efficiency, what you're using with your cloud resources. As MVPs, for instance, we get a budget of a few thousand US. So we do samples, but we keep it running. So we're wasting a lot of compute for nothing. And I've learned that in the research, I think 2 years ago, it was like estimated that all clouds are basically, wasting almost $22 billion. All kinds of resources over-dimensioned or not scaled properly and just running. So that impacts the environment. So you can have things like financial operations that gets more up and coming. And even Microsoft is part of the foundation that runs the FinOps. You have things like GitOps where you can think of setting up your infrastructure, or even I heard the term light switch ops. So it means like you turn it on, you have your environment, you turn it off, it's gone. And that could mean that you could save potentially energy, but also costs in the end. So these are kind of things, but it all generates around ops. And then the other thing that makes integration also hard is when you have to work with people. Could be that there's an architecture board that sits up there in the ivory tower and thinks, well, this is the only way and the only way going. Can be trust issue, doesn't necessarily have to be with your colleague, but if there's multiple parties at a customer working together or have to kind of get the integration up and running. So one's responsible for the complete infrastructure, they go through ticketing systems, or what I learned at a recent customer is like, although I know a lot of stuff about Azure, still he doesn't trust me or anyone from our organization. So having an app registration takes some time. So your lead times can increase. So that can become a problem too. Another thing is wrong expectations, toxic culture maybe, the citizen developer, nothing wrong with citizen developer, but they can have access to data or they can start building stuff so you can control it, so there's no governance. That can be an issue as well. And the other interesting thing is the way of working. I think a lot of us are working in an agile manner, using DevOps and everything supported in that way. Although there's still customers saying, no, we first want to have the whole design ironclad and then you can start. So that's the waterfall. So usually these collide. So the thing is, and I'm not going to, there's probably other things you could talk about, testing and etc. But yeah, when it comes to technologies and integration and what you exactly should do, then you're thinking like, it depends. You sometimes hear these phrases, right? It depends. Well, it depends upon your decision criteria. That's what it is. And of course, your functional requirements and also your non-functional requirements, right? The ilities. So does it really need to be air-gapped or not? Do you really want to isolate it? Because it comes down also to cost. If you really want that, let's say, air-gapped Azure solution, you end up in the premium SKUs. And then your TCO, I did it for one of the customers, an insurance company. They want everything air-gapped. They had the ICE, they had everything set up, and then the TCO was 35,000 euros a month. And even an insurance company in Netherlands that has multiple sites up, multiple labels, and they spend in the year time about $1 million Azure consumption. The thing though is, can we make it easier, integration, or is there something that can ease our lives a little bit? It's not my dog, actually, I have 2 dogs, but I can't do this because then the dog will jump out. But yeah, there are things that can make it easy. And some of you might be familiar if a company wants to go to the cloud, you got Cloud Adoption Framework. And it's not just Azure that does it, it's also AWS and Google. They all have their adoption framework. So they want you to come to the cloud. Or what I recently learned, we can build something like Cross Connect, so then we can connect clouds and then you can migrate. So they're all trying to entice each other to come to the cloud. But the Cloud Adoption Framework is really cool. Why is that? This is just a standard picture, but yeah, it thinks about, okay, what's your strategy, what's your plan, why you want to go to the cloud, and the adoption and the migration, so you can do lift and shift, server, Azure Migrate, it's up there as a VM. But what I find more important are these 2 at the bottom. It's governance and manage. But governance in particular, because what you yesterday heard at the keynote, Royal Mail said something, yeah, we wish we had the basics completely correct, and also the governance and the way of working, all that stuff. That's very important. And even at a current company that's still not at the cloud, we're thinking about this governance first and how are these parties going to work together? Because one does the infrastructure, one is going to build the integration cloud, and there's another company doing the Power Platform, the business apps on top of that. So it's kind of systems of records. You got this CRM system that moves to the cloud. Then you have like a flexible layer. It's going to be like at least API management, maybe some other Azure services that we can use, integration services, and then expose them to whatever's going to consume them. And that's going to be including the Power Platform. So that's why there's 3 parties. And what coincides really well with the Cloud Adoption Framework is, what you want to heard as well, is the well-architected framework with some of the pillars. And again, AWS and Google all have these well-architected framework things. And even Microsoft also has this architecture center that you can leverage if you want to. So it's all about cost optimization, excellence, efficiency, reliability, a lot of the ilities again. Another thing which we apply as well, and what's very important, will help you, is Azure is architecture design records, ADRs. It helps with communication. It helps with setting up why did you choose for a certain technology and put this in this type of format. Simple text format, markdown, including diagrams, header, and you can check it in source control, whether it's GitHub or DevOps. reasoning behind this, and this is just an example of it. So you have like your status, so you agree upon a certain decision. You provide context, rationale, and consequences. Because when someone later on comes in that project, like, why did you do this? And they're like, oh, well, because, he said so. No, you can really say, you can point towards that documentation. This is why we did it. So you have all these ADRs sitting right there. So it explains really why a group of people decided, let's say, on integration patterns or what kind of messaging they would choose, etc. And it just follows kind of a method in understand the decision, produce some options, evaluate those, and then effectively decide on one and communicate. That's what it is. It's a means of communication with you people in your project or the future one that onboards on your project. Why certain decisions have been made. The other thing, and that's going to be a really interesting session tomorrow by Daniel Toomey, so he's going to really dive into landing zones, but I just want to mention this as a way of setting up your environments consistently to prevent like configuration drift and that kind of stuff. So having like a setup of generic services and different services, and potentially network if that's involved, policies, tagging, so you can really, and even cost management, so you can set this up. And there's also one for the integration landing zone. I think there's two now. That's what Daniel's going to dive into. And this is really going to help you set up the environment consistently. Reasoning why you would do it, compliance, security, of course. Depending on your workload, you can effectively expand those or customize those. You don't effectively have to apply the ones that are provided, but you can create your own if you want, or you can tweak those, reimagine them, and then apply them towards your operating model, and then you got that set. Helps with the quality. And then the other thing, what I think is interesting, yes, drinking, of course.
Hey. You stole my photo.
Well, I had another one, and apparently this one fits the. But it's interact with your peers, not just internally in your company, but also like a conference like this. That you interact with each other and exchange idea and knowledge, and maybe even some seeds or stuff, are planted in your head, or you think about, wait a minute, Michael's son sent something interesting. Maybe I'm going to apply this too, which I actually did in the past with BizDoc Server. I give him credit for it. Didn't think that way, but it really helped. And yeah, I think interacting with peers is important. Going to conferences like these where you can exchange ideas and get some other one's perspective. Some might even come to me after this talk and say, hey, well, I liked it or didn't like it, or hey, wait, why didn't you mention this or that? So I think that's really important. And the final thing I want to say to make things easier, that might sound, this is just a list of a few keywords, but set right expectations. May sound like, yeah, of course, duh, but yeah, the ownership. Who's going to own that platform in the end? Because initially you build it up, but then the client ultimately says, yeah, but then we're going to operate it. So how is your transition to support going to look like? So who takes effectively ownership? Agree on the way of working in the beginning. The governance, like, okay, this is the way we're going to work. We're going to apply tagging. We're going to apply these policies. It is either yes or no, tightened with isolation and going forward. I think a kickoff is important because we work remotely a lot, but seeing each other face to face at a kickoff, like, okay, I know who you guys are, and then later on, okay, when you talk to one, I know him, even if he has the camera off. I think that works. What also will work is, those ADRs, because of the onboarding, always expect that someone can leave the company or leave the project. Even these days, people burn up. That's possible, and then someone has to fill the void. And if there's no ADRs, if there's no documentation, if they haven't catered for it, then it slows down. Or people get frustrated because no one is guiding them. And that's what I see as well. Transparency, I think, is important towards each other. I've read a book about Accelerate. It's all about DevOps. But yeah, if you want to be a high-performant organization, yeah, transparency, that communication, that trust is really important. If things fail, dive into why it failed and try to learn from it instead like, you did it wrong. That's not the way you should do it. And I like to end kind of that you have to keep things not too complicated, so simple and stupid. So I think that's important too. And maybe this session inspires you, or you know all this, but yeah, just don't overcomplicate things. Just follow the guidance that is available by the cloud provider, by some of the consultancy company that do these kind of things. If you want to get in touch, there's LinkedIn, there's the website, Twitter, or, well, I'm still here. So I would say enjoy the rest of the conference. These days I have a beard. The next guy also has a beard. So, and yeah, thank you very much.